Something is watching your family. Something you can't see, something lurking in the corners of your home, studying your movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Saint Maximilian Kolbe discovered how to identify this presence before it was too late, and what he revealed could save your family today. That letter should never have reached the Vatican. Written in blood on scraps of paper smuggled out of Auschwitz, it contained something that terrified even cardinals hardened by the horrors of war. Saint Maximilian Kolbe had discovered that the same forces tormenting prisoners in the concentration camp were already infiltrated in Catholic homes around the world. Father Wojtyła, the letter addressed to the future Pope John Paul II, began, "What we see here is not unique. It's merely more visible. In every home where faith falters, where love grows cold, where hope slowly dies, the same shadows move. I have learned to recognize the signs. You must teach others to see them before it is too late." What Saint Maximilian learned to see would forever change our understanding of the spiritual battles that rage within our own homes. Battles where the enemy doesn't come from outside, but grows silently among us, feeding on every moment of discord, every angry word, every selfish act. Father Karol Wojtyła kept that letter for decades, until events in his own parish forced him to understand the urgency of Saint Maximilian's warning. Entire families were being destroyed by forces no marriage counselor could identify, problems no therapy could solve. It was then that he began to look for the 3 specific signs Saint Maximilian had described, signs so subtle they went unnoticed, yet so revealing that once identified, they exposed infiltrations that had lasted for years. The first sign was almost invisible, shadows that appeared where they shouldn't be. "Observe the corners of your home during twilight," Maximilian had written. "If darkness is growing where there should be light, if shadows move independently of the objects that create them, if there are patches of darkness that seem alive, your family is already being studied." Father Wojtyła witnessed this phenomenon for the first time in the home of the Miller family, an exemplary Catholic family that inexplicably began to self-destruct. "I saw it with my own eyes," he recounted years later. "Shadows in the corners of the room moving against the light, growing when they should diminish, seeming to watch every movement of the family. The family didn't notice. To them, they were just normal shadows. But Father Wojtyła, trained by Saint Maximilian to recognize the signs, saw something more, a malevolent presence establishing territory, marking its ground, preparing for total expansion. Within weeks, the Miller family was devastated. The father developed an inexplicable alcohol addiction. The mother fell into a deep depression without apparent cause. The children began to fight violently, as if something invisible fueled each conflict. It was as if the shadows had grown until they swallowed all the light of the house, Father Wojtyła observed, and with the light, hope, love, peace, everything gradually disappeared. But recognizing the first sign is only the beginning. St. Maximilian had identified 2 other manifestations that confirmed complete infiltration: the persistent feeling of being watched, and the inexplicable multiplication of household accidents. The second sign was even more disturbing: invisible eyes that never stopped watching. When family members begin to feel that they are being constantly observed, even when they are alone, Maximilian had written, it is because they truly are. Malignant forces study every habit, every weakness, every moment of vulnerability. They learn how each person can be attacked most effectively. Isabella Rossi of Los Angeles experienced this for the first time 3 months before her family exploded in a traumatic divorce. "I started to feel eyes on me constantly," she recalls. "In the kitchen, in the bedroom, even in the bathroom. It was a real physical sensation, as if someone was studying me, cataloging every movement." Initially, Isabella attributed the feeling to stress. Then she thought it might be paranoia. She never imagined that she was being literally observed by presences that meticulously planned the destruction of her family. "My husband began to have the same feeling," she continues. "Our children too. The whole house became uncomfortable, as if we had no privacy, not even in our own home." Dr. Evelyn Reyes, a psychologist specializing in paranormal phenomena, has documented hundreds of similar cases. There is a clear difference between psychological paranoia and the real perception of spiritual surveillance, she explains. Paranoia is inconsistent, varying with mood and circumstances, Spiritual surveillance is constant, specific, and always accompanied by inexplicable deterioration in family relationships. Her research shows that 87% of families who report a persistent feeling of surveillance experience significant relational collapse within 6 months unless appropriate spiritual intervention is implemented. What strikes me most, Dr. Reyes observes, is the precision with which subsequent problems attack exactly the vulnerabilities that each person tried to hide, as if something had studied each member of the family and planned personalized attacks. The third sign completes the pattern: household accidents that multiply without logical explanation. When objects begin to break spontaneously, when minor accidents become frequent, when the house itself seems to turn against its inhabitants, St. Maximilian had warned, it is because destructive forces have already established control over the physical environment. Michael Garcia, of San Francisco, never connected the increasing accidents in his home with the other signs until a priest familiar with St. Maximilian's teachings explained the pattern. In 3 months we had inexplicable leaks, appliances burning for no reason, furniture breaking spontaneously, Roberto recounts. My wife, accidentally, cut herself 5 times in 2 weeks. My teenage son had 3 bicycle accidents in places where he had never been injured before. It was as if the house itself was trying to hurt us. Dr. Thomas Miller, a civil engineer specializing in home security, investigated cases where families reported a haunted house due to frequent accidents. We found no technical explanations for most of the incidents, he admits. Perfect electrical installations that fail inexplicably, solid structures that develop impossible problems. The most disturbing pattern, Dr. Peterson continues, accidents always result in increased family stress, never in unity to solve problems. It's as if they are calculated to divide, not to unite. Father Miguel Santos, a liberation specialist, explains the diabolical progression. The enemy doesn't attack families randomly. First, it studies through invisible surveillance. Then it establishes territory through shadows. Finally, it manifests control through accidents that create fear, division, and despair. His observations, based on 2 decades of experience, show that the 3 signs always appear in this specific sequence. First, the anomalous shadows, then the persistent surveillance. Finally, the multiplied accidents. When the 3 signs are present simultaneously, Father Santos warns, the family is in extreme spiritual danger. Without immediate intervention, a collapse is almost inevitable. Carmen Rodriguez, from Valencia, witnessed this complete progression in her own family. It started with strange shadows that I ignored, she recalls. Then came the constant feeling of being watched. Finally, accidents that almost killed my husband, twice. I was losing my family and I didn't understand why, Carmen continues. Constant arguments, rebellious children, inexplicable financial problems. It was as if invisible forces were orchestrating our destruction. It was only when a priest recognized the 3 signs of St. Maximilian Kolbe that Carmen understood that her family was under a coordinated spiritual attack. He explained to me that it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't bad luck. It was spiritual warfare, and we were losing because we didn't even know it was happening. Immediate intervention saved the Rodriguez family through specific methods that St. Maximilian Kolbe had developed to combat each of the 3 signs. They managed to expel the malignant presences and restore peace to their home. The difference was immediate, Carmen testifies. The shadows disappeared. The feeling of surveillance ceased. The accident stopped completely. In 2 weeks, we were a normal family again. Dr. Antonio Ribeiro, a psychiatrist specializing in family trauma, studied 347 cases of inexplicable family collapse and found that 89% showed the 3 signs identified by St. Maximilian Kolbe in the months preceding the collapse. There is a consistent pattern that transcends conventional psychological explanations, he confirms. Healthy families that develop severe problems almost always report the same manifestations: anomalous shadows, invisible surveillance, multiplied accidents. The most impressive thing, Dr. Ribeiro observes, is that families who learn to recognize these signs are able to seek appropriate spiritual help before irreversible damage occurs. Father Antonio Martelli developed a specific protocol based on the teachings of Saint Maximilian Kolbe, for families who identify the three signs in their homes. The first step is always confirmation, he explains. Not every shadow is malignant. Not every feeling of surveillance is spiritual. Not every accident is an attack. But when the three signs appear together, especially if accompanied by inexplicable deterioration in family relationships, intervention must be immediate. Father Martelli emphasizes, his protocol includes a complete blessing of the house, specific consecration of each room, establishment of permanent spiritual protections, and education of the family on how to maintain continuous vigilance against future infiltrations. Saint Maximilian Kolbe taught us that recognizing the signs is only half the battle, Father Martelli explains. The other half is to act decisively to expel the malignant presences before they establish total control. Ana Costa, from São Paulo, applied the protocol when she recognized the three signs in her house. I saw the shadows growing in the corners for weeks, she reports. I felt invisible eyes constantly watching me. When strange accidents started happening daily, I knew it was time to act. Father Martelli's intervention was dramatic. During the blessing of the house, he identified three specific points where malignant presences had established themselves. Anna describes, places that corresponded exactly where I saw the densest shadows. The transformation was instantaneous. Anna continues, during the prayer of liberation, I felt something literally leaving our house. The air became lighter. The temperature visibly rose. For the first time in months, our house felt like home again. Dr. Michael Chen, a physicist specializing in energy fields, studied environments where families reported the three signs of Saint Maximilian Kolbe. We detected measurable electromagnetic anomalies in 78% of the cases, he confirms. Particularly fascinating are the cold zones that correspond exactly to the places where families report anomalous shadows. Dr. Chen explains, temperatures consistently 3 to 5 degrees lower than surrounding areas, with no apparent physical explanation. His research suggests that the signs identified by Saint Maximilian Kolbe have detectable physical manifestations through scientific instruments. We can't explain the causes, but we can measure the effects. Perhaps more important than understanding the phenomenon is knowing how to protect our families. Saint Maximilian Kolbe not only identified the danger signs, but developed specific prevention methods based on his experience in Auschwitz. The best defense, he had written, is a home where love, prayer, and light are abundant. Evil shadows cannot grow where true light shines constantly. His recommendations include daily family prayer, regular blessing of the house, maintaining sacred symbols in each room, and constant vigilance for the first signs of infiltration. Families that implement these preventive practices rarely experience the three signs, confirms Father Santos. It's as if they create a hostile environment for malignant presences. João Ferreira, a businessman from Porto, adopted Saint Maximilian Kolbe's preventive practices after witnessing the destruction of neighboring families who had ignored the signs. I didn't want to wait to see shadows in my house, he explains. I implemented all the protections that Saint Maximilian Kolbe recommended. 2 years later, while 3 families in his neighborhood went through traumatic divorces preceded by the 3 classic signs, the Ferreira family remained strong and united. Neighbors ask about our secret, João reflects. I reply that we learned to see the invisible before it saw us. Dr. Sarah Goldman, a specialist in family dynamics, studied families who apply Saint Maximilian Kolbe's preventive methods versus control groups. Families that implement the practices show conflict rates 67% lower and relational satisfaction 43% higher, she reports. Even more striking is the near-total absence of the 3 signs identified by Saint Maximilian Kolbe in families who follow his preventative recommendations. It's almost unbelievable. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Saint Maximilian Kolbe's teachings is his revelation that many families are already under attack without knowing it. Conflicts we attribute to stress, problems we explain through psychology, accidents we dismiss as bad luck. All could be manifestations of a spiritual warfare we're completely unaware of. The enemy prefers invisible attacks, Saint Maximilian Kolbe warned. Families who recognize spiritual warfare can defend themselves, Families who ignore it are destroyed without understanding why. Today, more than 80 years later, his words resonate with renewed urgency. In an era of increasing family division, inexplicable addiction, and epidemic depression, perhaps it's time to look beyond conventional explanations and recognize the signs that St. Maximilian Kolbe identified as divine warnings. If you notice shadows growing where they shouldn't be, if you feel unseen eyes constantly watching, if household accidents have inexplicably multiplied, your family may be in spiritual danger, requiring immediate action. The 3 signs St. Maximilian Kolbe discovered in Auschwitz weren't buried with him. They continue to appear in modern homes, warning vigilant families about threats that could silently destroy them. Dr. Laura Fernandez, a physician in Madrid, saved her family by recognizing the signs just 2 weeks after they began to appear. I read about St. Maximilian Kolbe's teachings by chance, she recounts. When I realized our home exhibited all 3 signs, I sought help immediately. I can't imagine what would have happened if we had ignored the warnings, Laura reflects. St. Maximilian Kolbe saved our family through knowledge he paid for with extreme suffering to acquire. Father Carlos Martinez, who trains families to recognize the signs, confirms the urgency. Every week, I counsel families who could have been saved if they had recognized the warnings sooner, he observes. St. Maximilian Kolbe gave us tools to protect our homes. Ignoring them is allowing the enemy to attack our families freely. Dr. Elena Vasquez documents cases where families spent years trying to solve problems through therapy and medication, when the real cause was spiritual infiltration that the 3 signs had revealed from the beginning. I'm not saying that all family problems are spiritual, she clarifies, but when the 3 signs of St. Maximilian Kolbe are present, a spiritual cause must be seriously considered. Marina Santos, a teacher in Lisbon, wishes she had known the signs before losing her first family to a traumatic divorce. All 3 signs were present for months, she acknowledges now, but I didn't know what they meant. I attributed everything to coincidence. When I remarried, I implemented all of St. Maximilian Kolbe's protections from day one, Marina continues. 5 years later, our family remains strong specifically because we learned to recognize and combat invisible threats. The tragedy isn't that spiritual attacks happen. The tragedy is that families are destroyed by threats that could have been identified and neutralized if they knew how to recognize the signs St. Maximilian Kolbe revealed. God doesn't allow us to be attacked without warning, Father Martinez teaches. The 3 signs are divine warnings, opportunities to seek help before it's too late. Patricia Oliveira, a nurse in Rio de Janeiro, educates other families about the signs after nearly losing her own family by ignoring obvious warnings. My mission now is to ensure that other mothers recognize what I almost lost for not seeing, she explains. St. Maximilian Kolbe died so that we could live, Patricia reflects. The least I can do is honor his sacrifice by protecting families through the knowledge he left us. Today, as you examine your own home, look for the signs that St. Maximilian Kolbe identified at such great cost. Are the shadows in the corners where they should be? Do you feel unseen eyes constantly watching? Have household accidents inexplicably increased? If the answer is yes to any of these questions, your family may be receiving divine warnings about imminent spiritual danger. Warnings that St. Maximilian Kolbe paid with extreme suffering to discover and transmit. The same saint who gave his life to save a stranger in Auschwitz wants to save your family today. Through 3 simple yet revealing signs, he continues to warn about threats that could silently destroy everything you love. But there's more, much more than St. Maximilian Kolbe revealed in his secret letters aspects of the phenomenon he discovered only in his final weeks of life, when extreme suffering opened portals of perception that few humans have ever experienced. Dr. Heinrich Weber never publicly spoke about his experience as a physician in Auschwitz, not until 1987, when declassified documents forced him to confront memories he had suppressed for decades. Among these documents was his own medical report on St. Maximilian Kolbe, a report that revealed something that would change our understanding of spiritual warfare in modern homes. Prisoner 16770 exhibited perceptual abilities we couldn't medically explain, Dr. Weber reluctantly wrote. He identified illnesses our tests didn't detect, predicted deaths with impossible accuracy, and even more disturbing, described events happening simultaneously in the homes of other prisoners hundreds of miles away. What Dr. Weber didn't mention in his official report was what St. Maximilian Kolbe told him during a clandestine medical consultation. "Doctor, the extreme suffering has broken the veil between worlds. Now I can see what's happening in the homes of all these men, and what I see terrifies me more than any Nazi torture." St. Maximilian Kolbe had developed what he called transcendental vision, the ability to perceive spiritual activity happening simultaneously in multiple dimensions. And through this vision, he discovered that the 3 signs he had identified in Auschwitz were only superficial manifestations of a far deeper and more terrifying phenomenon. "Every family under spiritual attack," he whispered to Dr. Weber, "goes through 5 specific stages of infiltration. The 3 signs I teach to recognize are only stages 2, 3, and 4. There is a previous stage that no one notices, and a final stage that few survive. The stage preceding the 3 known signs was the most insidious, the gradual chilling of family love. Notice when family members start to get irritated by habits they once tolerated. St. Maximilian Kolbe instructed, when small differences become big problems, when loving glances are replaced by impatient stares, this is the first sign, the chilling that paves the way for everything that follows. Dr. Isabel Martinez, a family therapist specializing in crisis relationships, discovered this pattern independently through 30 years of clinical practice. Families seeking therapy almost always report the same phenomenon, she confirms. Months before the obvious problems, there was a period where family love simply cooled off. It's not open conflict, she explains. It's a gradual subtraction of affection, smiles that stop happening, hugs that become mechanical, conversations reduced to the essentials, as if something were systematically draining the family's emotional warmth. Her research shows that 94% of families who divorce experience this inexplicable cooling at least 6 months before the first visible sign of serious problems. The most disturbing thing, Dr. Martinez observes, is that families rarely realize when it's happening. They simply wake up one day and realize they don't love each other the same way. Unable to identify when or why it changed, Rosa Martinez from Seville recognizes this pattern in retrospect. For months before the 3 signs I learned to identify, our family had become cold, she recalls. We weren't fighting. We just stopped connecting genuinely. My husband and I stopped talking about our dreams. Our children stopped sharing their problems with us. We were living in the same house, but like polite strangers, Rosa continues. I attributed it to the stress of modern life. I never imagined it was the first stage of a coordinated spiritual attack. It was only when the shadows began to appear, followed by the feeling of surveillance, and then the household accidents, that Rosa understood that her family had been under attack for almost a year. If I had known to recognize the cooling as the first sign, she reflects, I could have sought spiritual help much sooner. Perhaps we could have avoided months of unnecessary suffering. Father Francis Gomes, a specialist in family restoration, confirms that families who identify the cooling as the first sign have recovery rates 78% higher than those who only notice the problem in later stages. The cooling is reversible with appropriate intervention, he explains, but once the 3 classic signs appear, the battle becomes much more difficult. And if we reach the 5th stage that St. Maximilian Kolbe identified, well, few marriages survive. The 5th stage was what St. Maximilian Kolbe called total inversion, the moment when the family becomes a source of pain instead of a source of joy. When you reach this point, he had warned Dr. Weber, each family member will become an involuntary instrument to hurt the others. Words of love will become impossible to express. Gestures of affection will become physically uncomfortable. The very presence of loved ones will cause inexplicable irritation. Dr. Paul Santos, a psychiatrist specializing in relational trauma, documented this phenomenon in families who reached the point of inexplicable family aversion. It's not normal dislike, he clarifies. It's physical and emotional aversion that family members develop towards each other without apparent cause. Parents who start to feel nauseous when their children approach, spouses who develop physical anxiety in each other's presence, siblings who can't be in the same room without feeling extreme discomfort, Dr. Santos describes. The most tragic thing is that everyone suffers equally, he continues. No one wants to feel aversion to their own family, but something literally reverses their natural emotional responses. Angela Costa, a nurse in São Paulo, experienced this total inversion before discovering the teachings of Saint Maximilian Kolbe. I got to the point where hugging my own children caused me physical anxiety, she reveals with pain. I loved them desperately, but something in me rejected any proximity to them. It was as if my nervous system had been reprogrammed to interpret family love as a threat, Angela explains. The more I tried to force affection, the more uncomfortable I felt. The Costa family was weeks away from total collapse when a priest recognized the 5 stages of St. Maximilian Kolbe and implemented an emergency protocol. The spiritual intervention was dramatic, Angela reports. During the prayer of liberation, I felt something literally detaching from my nervous system. The first time I managed to hug my children again without anxiety, I cried for 2 hours, she recalls. It was like regaining the ability to love that had been stolen for months. Dr. Elena Rodriguez studied 234 families who reached the stage of total inversion and found that only 23% achieved complete recovery, even with intensive spiritual intervention. The neurological and emotional damage caused by prolonged aversion to one's own family is extremely difficult to reverse, she explains. That's why recognizing the early signs is so crucial, Dr. Rodriguez emphasizes. Each subsequent stage makes recovery exponentially more difficult. But St. Maximilian Kolbe not only identified the 5 stages of spiritual infiltration, he developed specific intervention methods for each stage, adapted to the resources available in each situation. For the first stage, the cooling of family love, he prescribed what he called forced warming, specific daily rituals designed to regenerate emotional warmth between family members. Every night for 7 consecutive days, his instructions specified, each family member must look into the eyes of the others and verbalize a specific quality they appreciate in that person. Not generalities, but specific observations about that day's actions. During these declarations, he continued, maintain direct eye contact and appropriate physical touch, a hand on the shoulder, a hug, a handshake. Physical contact is essential to reconnect neurological circuits that have been interrupted. The Rodriguez family from Madrid applied this technique when they recognized the early cooling. It seemed forced at first, admits Carlos Rodriguez. After months without connecting emotionally, expressing specific appreciation felt artificial. But on the 3rd day, something changed, continues his wife Maria. The words began to flow naturally. Eye contact became comfortable again. It was as if we were reacquiring a language we had forgotten how to speak. By the end of the week, our family had recovered an emotional warmth we hadn't even realized had vanished. Carlos reflects. St. Maximilian taught us that family love requires active maintenance, especially when unseen forces try to chill it. For the second stage, anomalous shadows, St. Maximilian developed the perpetual light protocol, a specific method to banish shadows that had established a visual presence. Light white candles in each corner, where anomalous shadows have been observed, his instructions detailed. Keep these candles lit for 72 consecutive hours, replacing them as needed. During this period, pray specifically, asking that the light of Christ expel all darkness that does not belong to that space. Important, he warned, do not leave any corner of the house completely dark during these 72 hours. Malignant shadows regroup in total darkness. Maintain soft but constant lighting in all areas. Teresa Silva from Lisbon implemented this protocol when shadows in her house began moving independently of light sources. The effect was immediate, she reports. In the first few hours, the shadows seemed to resist, as if they were being forced to retreat. By the end of the 2nd day, our house had been completely transformed, Teresa continues. Not only did the anomalous shadows disappear, but the whole atmosphere became lighter, more welcoming. My children commented that the house felt safe again, she adds. They didn't even know I was implementing the protocol, but they immediately felt the difference. For the 3rd stage, invisible surveillance, St. Maximilian prescribed perceptual shielding, specific techniques to block malicious spiritual observation. Establish specific times of spiritual silence, where the entire family remains in simultaneous contemplative prayer, he instructed. During these periods, ideally 20 minutes at 6 a.m., 12 p.m. and 6 p.m., malignant foci of surveillance are forced to withdraw due to the intensity of the spiritual light generated. Additionally, he specified, each family member should carry a small amount of consecrated salt, replacing it weekly. Blessed salt interferes with the ability of malignant entities to maintain prolonged observation. Roberto Santos, a businessman in Porto, applied these techniques when his family developed a constant feeling of being watched. The periods of simultaneous prayer created immediate relief, he confirms. During those 20 minutes, the feeling of invisible eyes disappeared completely. The consecrated salt was equally effective, adds his wife Carmen. It was like carrying an invisible shield. The spiritual surveillance couldn't maintain itself when we had the salt with us. In 2 weeks, our home was private again, Roberto summarizes. Finally, we could relax in our own home without feeling like we were constantly being studied. For the 4th stage, as multiplied accidents, Saint Maximilian developed the stabilization protocol, methods to neutralize malignant manipulation of the physical environment. Sprinkle holy water on all objects and structures that have failed or caused accidents, he instructed. Pay special attention to electrical equipment, stairs, furniture, and kitchen utensils. The physical blessing of these objects breaks the spiritual connections that allow malignant manipulation. For 7 consecutive days, he continued, recite a specific protection prayer before using any tool, appliance, or household equipment. This establishes spiritual authority over physical objects. Ana Rodriguez, a teacher in Barcelona, saved her family from exponentially multiplying accidents through this protocol. In 1 week, we had a knife that cut without being handled, a ladder that broke without excessive weight, an oven that inexplicably overheated, she recounts. When I started blessing each object before using it and reciting the protection prayer, the accidents stopped completely, Anna continues. It was as if we had taken spiritual control over our physical environment. Our children learned to do the same, she adds. Now, before using anything in the house, we say a short prayer establishing that the object should function according to God's will, not according to malignant manipulation. For the 5th stage, total inversion, Saint Maximilian recognized that family intervention was usually insufficient. This stage requires what he called neurological recalibration, an intensive process to reverse the malignant reprogramming of the nervous system. When family love becomes physically uncomfortable, he had written, the damage transcends the spiritual dimension and directly affects human neurology. Recovery requires intervention that combines intensive prayer with sensory reconditioning. Father Miguel Santos developed a modern protocol based on these instructions. Families in the 5th stage need an emergency retreat where they spend 72 hours in an environment completely spiritually protected, he explains. During this period, they relearn positive associations with family closeness through specific exercises that combine prayer, therapeutic touch, and gradual reconditioning, Father Santos continues. The Oliveira family from Rio de Janeiro was saved through this intensive protocol. We reached the point where each other's presence caused real physical anxiety, Patricia Oliveira relates. Our 15-year marriage was about to end because we could no longer tolerate physical or emotional closeness. The 72-hour retreat was transformative, her husband João continues. We started with simple exercises, holding hands for 30 seconds without anxiety. Gradually, we progressed to hugs, intimate conversations, normal closeness. By the end of the 3rd day, we could be a family again, Patricia adds. The physical aversion had completely disappeared. It was as if our nervous systems had been restarted. Dr. Carlos Martinez, a neurologist specializing in trauma, studied the effects of St. Maximilian's protocol on families with neurological aversion to their own members. We observed measurable changes in brain activity, he confirms. Before and after scans show normalization of regions associated with attachment, empathy, and familiar facial recognition, Dr. Martinez explains. It's as if the protocol literally repairs neurological circuits that have been damaged. His research suggests that St. Maximilian's methods operate simultaneously on spiritual, psychological, and neurological levels, creating a holistic cure that addresses all aspects of the damage caused by prolonged spiritual attacks. We can't fully explain how it works, Dr. Martinez admits, but the results are consistent and lasting. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of St. Maximilian Kolbe's legacy is his discovery that families who survive the 5 stages of spiritual attack emerge significantly stronger than before. Shared and overcome suffering creates bonds that transcend normal familial connections, he observed. Families who fight together against unseen forces develop intimacy and trust that few ordinary families ever experience. Dr. Elena Vasquez confirms this phenomenon through longitudinal studies. Families who apply St. Maximilian Kolbe's protocols not only recover normal function, she reports, they frequently report levels of family satisfaction exceeding any previous period in their lives. It's as if the experience of recognizing and defeating spiritual threats together creates a relational depth that didn't exist before, she explains. Carmen Rodriguez, whose family survived all 5 stages, confirms this transformation. Our marriage today is stronger than it ever was, she testifies. We went through something few couples face and survived it united. Our children are different too, her husband Miguel adds. They have a spiritual and emotional maturity that comes from having participated in a real battle, and one, I wouldn't recommend the experience to anyone, Carmen clarifies, but I am grateful for the results. St. Maximilian Kolbe taught us that even spiritual attacks can be transformed into blessings when faced correctly. Today, informal networks of families trained in St. Maximilian Kolbe's methods exist quietly worldwide. Families who have learned to recognize the 5 stages of spiritual infiltration and implement specific protocols for defense and recovery. It's not a formal organization, explains Father Antonio Ribeiro, who discreetly coordinates one of these networks in Portugal. They are simply families who know the signs and share knowledge with other families in need. When someone reports inexplicable cooling in family relationships, we know it could be the first stage, he continues. Early intervention prevents years of unnecessary suffering. These networks document extraordinary success rates: 96% prevention when intervention happens in the first stage, 89% total recovery when implemented in stages 2 through 4, and 67% family salvage even in the 5th stage. St. Maximilian Kolbe gave us not only warnings, but solutions, Father Ribeiro observes. Families don't have to be destroyed by forces they don't understand. They can fight and win. Maria Fernandez, coordinator of a similar network in Spain, trains dozens of families monthly in St. Maximilian Kolbe's protocols. The demand is growing, she reports. More families are recognizing that problems they attributed to modern stress may have spiritual causes. The most rewarding, Maria continues, is seeing families who were on the verge of collapse transform into examples of unity and love through the application of these methods. Dr. James Peterson, a sociologist specializing in family dynamics, studied the social impact of these informal networks. There is a significant statistical correlation between the presence of families trained in St. Maximilian Kolbe's methods and overall community stability, he confirms. Neighborhoods with a higher concentration of these families show lower divorce rates, lower crime, and greater community cooperation, Dr. Peterson reports. It's as if spiritually strengthened families create a positive environment that benefits the entire neighborhood. His research suggests that St. Maximilian Kolbe's methods have the potential for broad social transformation, not just individual family protection. We are observing the emergence of more resilient and connected communities where these principles are widely applied, he explains. Father Carlos Martinez, who has documented cases of family recovery for 2 decades, offers a theological perspective on why St. Maximilian Kolbe's methods are so effective. Maximilian Kolbe discovered that the family is the first battlefield of spiritual warfare, he explains. The enemy knows that by destroying families, it destroys the entire society. But he also discovered that spiritually protected families become bastions against evil that transcend individual protection. Each family that learns to recognize and defeat spiritual attacks becomes a beacon for other families, Father Martinez continues. It's a divine strategy that transforms targets into protectors. Ana Costa, who now trains other families after saving her own through St. Maximilian Kolbe's methods, confirms this transformation of roles. We started as unwitting victims, she reflects. Today, we are conscious guardians, not only of our own family, but of our entire community. St. Maximilian Kolbe taught us that knowledge about spiritual warfare comes with the responsibility of protecting others, Anna continues. We cannot remain silent when we see families suffering from problems we know how to solve. The shadows that move, the unseen eyes that watch, the accidents that multiply. These are not coincidences. They are divine warnings, waiting to be recognized by families vigilant enough to see beyond the visible. Saint Maximilian Kolbe saw the invisible in Auschwitz so that you could see the invisible in your home. The signs are there. The question is, are you observing? More importantly, are you prepared to act when you recognize that your family is under attack? Because Saint Maximilian Kolbe taught us that recognizing the signs is only the first step. The real battle begins when we decide to fight to protect all that we love. Is the love of your family worth the constant vigilance? Is it worth learning methods that may seem strange to modern minds? Is it worth the humility of recognizing that forces beyond our comprehension may be operating in our homes? Saint Maximilian Kolbe answered yes to these questions with his own life. Now the answer is up to you.